World War II pushed human ingenuity to its limits. Soldiers, often cold, exhausted, and cut off from supplies, relied not just on weapons and training, but on clever, field-tested survival tricks that sometimes prove more valuable than official doctrine. Some of these methods were so effective that units kept them classified, passing them quietly from veteran to recruit. They weren't myths, they weren't rumours. They were real survival tools that could mean the difference between coming home or becoming a name on a monument. Below are 8 of the most remarkable and little-known survival tricks that World War II soldiers kept off the books. The silent frostbite cure. Warming arteries at the source. Winter campaigns in the Ardennes, Finland, and the Eastern Front introduced a problem deadlier than bullets freeze injuries. Doctors discovered a fast, secret technique that soldiers rarely admitted using, warming the major arteries instead of the hands or feet themselves. Instead of rubbing frozen fingers, which caused tissue to tear, soldiers were taught quietly to warm the inner thighs, place hands under armpits, and pack snow boots against the stomach or chest. The two-knife compass. Emergency direction finding. When a soldier was separated from his unit, particularly in the Pacific or North African deserts, traditional navigation became almost impossible. A secret field technique circulated through commando and reconnaissance groups, using 2 metal objects to create an impromptu compass. The method. First, magnetize a blade by stroking it repeatedly on wool or silk. Then float it on a leaf, cork, or even a strip of paper. Finally, let it align with Earth's magnetic field. It wasn't perfectly accurate, but accurate enough to move toward friendly territory instead of stumbling deeper into hostile lines. The so-called heat bottle hoax was all about turning an ordinary canteen into a, makeshift night heater. On the freezing slopes of Italy and in the bitter cold of the Hürtgen forest, soldiers found that if you filled your canteen with boiling water before bed, it could make a dramatic difference in surviving the night. But there was a catch. A warm metal object like that gives off visible infrared, which could be spotted by night patrols. So the trick had to evolve, really. Soldiers began wrapping their canteens in socks, spare shirts, or even layers of newspaper. This not only absorbed the heat signature and prevented burns, but also produced just enough radiant warmth to keep their core temperatures safe, even in near sub-zero conditions. Medics actually credited this clever little trick with preventing thousands of hypothermia cases, though, interestingly, it never made its way into any official manuals. Then there was the smoke without the fire technique, what they called the soil cooker. Partisans, rangers, and resistance fighters all needed ways to cook without giving away their position. The answer was surprisingly simple. Use the earth itself as a smoke filter. They dig a pit furnace about 2 feet deep and then create a narrow chimney trench, covering it with branches, moss, and tightly packed soil. This honestly let them cook in relative safety, with almost no smoke to betray their location. The wet cloth silencer, making weapons quiet in just seconds. In close quarters fighting, especially in places like urban France and those dense jungle islands, silence often meant survival. Soldiers, used a secret improvisation that was never formally documented. They wrapped wet fabric around a rifle muzzle or pistol. The cloth did a few things. It trapped muzzle gases, muffled the sound, and even suppressed the muzzle flash. Now, it wasn't as quiet as a true suppressor, but it cut enough noise to avoid alerting nearby patrols. Commanders, though, really disliked it because it risked barrel damage. So soldiers used it secretly and quietly, taught it only to those they trusted. The spider thread trick. That's how they detected enemy movement. In dense forests or abandoned buildings, elite scouts used nature itself as an alarm system. They learned to spot spider webs stretched across trails. A web meant no one had passed recently. But they also used webs tactically. Pull a thin line of spider silk across a doorway or path. Leave it undisturbed, and then return later to check if the thread had snapped. Veterans of North Africa and the Eastern Front discovered a disturbing fact. Dry soil offered almost no protection from artillery fragments. But, wet earth absorbed explosions far better, providing a crucial shield for those huddled in their foxholes, just trying to survive shrapnel. Before bombardments, soldiers who had time would, soak the walls of their foxholes, pack the mud tightly, and reinforce the lip with wet sandbags. Tests later confirmed that wet earth reduced shrapnel penetration by over 40%. Units that knew this secret suffered far fewer casualties, but the trick spread slowly, mostly by word of mouth. The last match signal was a sort of evacuation planning. Among airborne and commando troops there was this unwritten rule: always save one dry match. Not for warmth, but for signalling rescue. A single flame at just the right moment could direct gliders, trigger pre-planned extraction signals, or alert friendlies without broadcasting radio noise. WWII wasn't just one with strategy or superior weaponry. It was one with thousands of tiny survival tricks whispered between soldiers. These secret methods worked because they were simple, fast, and brutally effective. They were crafted not in laboratories, but in the mud, snow, and jungle under the most desperate conditions humans had ever faced.